Yeah, welcome back, everybody who's been here before. This is our first class of the new year, so I'm so happy to see our group is back together, and we have lots of new people on the line. I'm very happy to see y'all here, so welcome. If y'all want to write into the chat how you heard about us and how you got kind of tuned on to our virtual visit series, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen. I'm also going to introduce you to Lorenzo. Hey, Lorenzo. He's my friend here in Tuscany. He's at his house in Florence, and he's, as y'all know, he's a chef, and he's also a computer person. So he's my tech guy, and he'll also pipe up with some food comments, although we're going to Mantua today, which is far enough away from Tuscany that even though Lorenzo's opinionated, we'll see how opinionated he is when it comes to Mantuan food. So they do some flavor combinations I'm not real sure that he's gonna be happy about, but we'll find that out when we get to the food part. So we're gonna make a visit to Mantua, which you see here on the map, and we're gonna talk about the development of an artist called Andrea Mantegna, who was born in Padua, which is, my buttons got moved around. There we go. Padua is here, so kind of in the territory of Venice on the terraferma, and we're going to talk about the development of the artist Andrea Mantegna and then the works he created for the Marchesi Gonzaga in Mantua. And then we're going to make some food that is really strongly linked to the city of Mantua. For those of y'all who haven't been here before, I am Elaine Trigiani. I'm an art historian, or was an art historian in a former life, and I've been working here in Italy for 20 years doing food and wine tourism. And since the pandemic, I've really kind of reimagined how I work, and we've been doing these virtual visits, which combine food and art history, so my two areas of interest and expertise. And I live just southwest of Florence, which is that other dot on the map. And this is my house. This is my landlord's house. I rent from the Count and Countess who live at the Castle of Poppiano. So I'm on the estate of the Castle of Poppiano here in the Florentine hills of Tuscany. And I live in the little Borgo, this little clutch of houses right here below the castle tower. And that's my house that you see there on the right. So that's where I'm located here below Florence. So we're gonna go up to, first we're gonna go to Padua and talk about the development of the artist Andrea Mantegna. And then we're gonna follow him to Mantua and take a look at Mantua and then make the tortelli mantovani. So Andrea Mantegna was born in a little place called Isola di Carturo. It's actually known now as Isola Mantegna. They've named it after him. That's how famous he is. They actually changed the name of the town in honor of him. And it was a little spot on the Brenta River, which dumps into the Venetian Lagoon. So it's a kind of marshy area. He was born there in 1431. He was born to kind of a humble family. His father was a woodworker. And he ended up at age 10, he was placed in an artist workshop in Padua, which was 15 miles away. So this 10-year-old kid gets put into the house of Francesco Squarcione. He lived in the Borgo Santa Lucia, which means the Santa Lucia neighborhood, which is that picture you see on the upper right. So 10-year-old Andrea gets stuck in the house of Francesco Squarcione, who was kind of this oddball painter collector person. His older brother lived in that same neighborhood, so at least he had, some family contact. And I wonder whether or not the older brother even maybe helped find a place for Andrea there in the artist workshop. So Squarcione, the two paintings that you see on this slide are done by the artist Squarcione. You can see he's a little bit old-fashioned, and he's a little bit of an oddball. He was a painter. He was also a collector. He was enthralled with antiquities. And also, he was very much aware of the new ideas coming out of Florence. So we're now in the 1440s, early Renaissance in Florence. And that's where just sort of the new trends are kind of being born right there with this group of artists who we're actually going to run into as they spread out from Florence. So Squarcione taught his apprentices to draw the ancient Roman fragments that were laying around in Padua. He had plaster casts even. There's an example here of the Augustus Prima Porta, one of the most famous statues of the Emperor Augustus. It's actually in Rome. So he had plaster casts of ancient Roman sculpture and taught these kids to draw by copying bits of ancient Roman works. He taught them to basically paint just the rudimentaries of painting, taught them to construct perspective. And he himself had this predilection for these funny swags of fruit and vegetables. And all of the people who came through his workshop kind of maintained that. So Mantegna went on to be one of the most important artists of the Italian Renaissance. In fact, Squarcione is now known as the teacher of Andrea Mantegna. But it's really interesting that some of the things Mantegna retained were this predilection for the swags, which again, is kind of a sad comment here, but I find them very interesting, and you'll just keep an eye out for them because they show up a lot. So he got that, he learned how to paint, obviously. He got this real interest for ancient art, and we'll see what he does with that in a minute. So Mantegna learned from Squarcione. He also learned directly from his surroundings. There are Roman ruins in Padua. There's a great humanistic climate in Padua. There's a great university there. It's the second oldest university in Italy. And it was actually in the 1440s and 1450s a center of artistic experiment, because by great stroke of luck, the Florentine sculptor Donatello was in Padua for a decade working on this monumental equestrian monument to Gatta Melata, who was a condottiere. So Donatello picks up and goes and just lives in Padua for a decade and brings with him all of this artistic ferment. He is kind of using classicizing elements. He's using humanistic ideas to represent figures naturally. He's also casting in bronze this enormous sculpture. Nobody had done this since the ancient Romans. It took 10 years for Donatello to plan this thing out, get it cast, and mount it. So interestingly, it's this enormous thing, and when you it's actually mounted very high on this pedestal, and when you're on the ground, this is the view that you see. So it's very dramatic. You're looking up from the ground to this figure, this condottiere, you know, kind of this strong military guy on top of his horse. While in Padua, Donatello did other commissions as well. He was asked to work on the Church of the Saint. That's what they call it, the Church of the Saint. And if you're in Padua, the saint is Saint Anthony of Padua. So they just call it the Church of the Saint, and everybody knows who he is. So Donatello was asked to do these enormous sculptures for the high altar of the Church of the Saint, and Mantegna certainly knew these and probably saw the models in the workshop and saw the sculptures as they came out of the foundry. And you have again, these very naturalistic details, these lifelike figures, monumental figures, very much concentrating on true human form. You can see the human forms kind of showing through the drapery, that contrapposto pose. Even some classicizing elements here too. If you look at the throne of the Madonna, and even her crown looks like sort of more of an antique touch. And then these, which are just incredibly innovative, low relief panels. This is called rilievo schiacciato. It's done in gilt bronze. And this is Donatello still. If you all remember from the church of Or San Michele, there was a rilievo schiacciato on the exterior of Or San Michele. We looked at that a couple of weeks ago. So what we're looking at here is basically this amazing illusionistic scene, two of them, whereby Donatello has employed mathematical formulas to plot single point perspective, and that allows him to realistically create this illusionistic space. He's making 3D out of a basically one-dimensional piece of metal. And what he's done, so you can see it here, there's a vanishing point that's about right here. So all of these architectural details are actually sight lines that come in here. And that works to focus our attention. It works to create that illusion of space, not just with the architecture, with the atmosphere, but also it allows Donatello to take this frieze of figures and even kind of recess the figures back into space. Everybody kind of diminishes, obviously, as they get smaller back into space. This was a huge deal. This is very innovative. It's coming out of the foundry right there in Padua, and Mantegna, the young artist, was just a sponge for this stuff. So not only that, but because Donatello were there, other artists were coming through here. Fra Filippo Lippi came through here, Paolo Uccello came through Padua. So there was a lot going on in Padua, even if he was in basically this provincial workshop of Squarcione. Tons of the greatest artists in the day were coming through. They also were traveling. So as a very young boy, or young teenager in any event, Mantegna goes with Squarcione to Venice, and he sees works of art such as Andrea del Castagno. Do y'all remember him? He's that great early Renaissance painter in Florence, who we looked at his Last Supper. That's the Last Supper that you see there on the bottom right. It's actually in Florence. We took a look at that painting, those monumental figures. Andrea del Castagno is painting figures as if they're pieces of sculpture, monumental figures with these kind of strong outlines. The other two pictures you see are from the Church of San Zaccaria in Venice. And we know that Mantegna saw these when he went to Venice with Squarcione. So the monumentality of the figures and this way of painting figures as if they're sculpture is something you're going to see also in the works of Mantegna. Mantegna tends to be a little bit kind of austere and severe in a similar way to Andrea Castagno. And what softens him up a little bit is his relationship with some Venetian painters who are, it's the Bellini workshop. So he was introduced to the workshop of Jacopo Bellini when he went to Venice in the late 1440s. He met Jacopo's sons, Giovanni and Gentile, who painted this work of art. And he also met their sister, Nicolosia, who he ended up marrying. So he actually married into the leading workshop in Venice in this period. So this is the painting of St. Mark preaching in Alexandria. The Gentile and Giovanni Bellini, the brothers, kind of transformed Venice into this great Egyptian square to show St. Mark preaching. And notice how they have taken a view from up above and are looking down on this great piazza that recedes into space. They also do more intimate paintings like this. This is Giovanni Bellini. Giovanni and Andrea Mantegna were particularly close, and they really influenced each other. And two things that are sort of important that Mantegna got from Bellini are kind of these soft little figures, these sort of the sweet, gentle figures. They're not these huge monumental works of sculpture. And it also, this kind of, notice this is not super linear. The Florentine painters are very much kind of dependent on their line, their contour, almost this hard contour. They're known for that. And it's a hallmark of their painting. The Venetians were totally different. Every time we talk about a Venetian painter, we talk about the way they use light and color. And Bellini here actually creates forms by blending color and light, and it's really just kind of an amazing feat. So look at the inset detail I put here of the baby Christ child. Notice the contour. It's this hazy kind of contour, non-contour. There's not just a hard line outlining the figure. He's really just kind of illusionistically, again, making this figure kind of appear in the atmosphere. It's really beautiful. And these particular painting techniques kind of rubbed off on Mantegna. Mantegna also went to Ferrara, where the great d'Este court was. He would have seen works by and perhaps also met Piero della Francesca. Piero's works in Ferrara don't exist, so I'm showing you works that we've seen from Arezzo and San Sepolcro. Piero also worked in Florence. He worked with Donatello. He's one of those guys who was literally one of the founding fathers of the Renaissance, one of those guys who learned how to plot perfect one-point perspective and create these architectural spaces in which to place his perfectly designed figures. I mean, he literally studied the actual proportions of the figure. And then on the right, again, very interesting use of perspective. And here's where he really took some artistic license with perspective. And I think this had a big impact also on Mantegna. So there's a vanishing point that's about right here, which makes us look up at the underside of the chin of the Roman soldier, for example, or this lip of the sarcophagus of Christ. But then for dramatic impact, Christ is looking straight on at us. So there's another vanishing point right about here, so that we're face to face with Christ. So for emotional impact, the artist Piero della Francesca took some artistic license with the perspective. And then another artist that was present in Ferrara is Roger van der Weyden. And you can see this is quite different from anything we've been looking at. Van der Weyden was a super famous Netherlandish painter, and he came down to Italy in 1450. He was in Ferrara, and he painted for other courts as well, and left paintings here and there, and was greatly influential. So things to notice here are that very crisp atmosphere, the depth of space, how the figures are placed in the picture plane. They're not smack up in our face, they're just slightly removed. And then most important of all, the minute attention to natural detail. The Netherlandish painters always paid just almost made like miniaturist little studies of fruits, vegetables, plants, rock formations, the way the towns in the background are formed. This is very much a hallmark of Netherlandish painting, and he had a great impact on Italian painting, including Andrea Mantegna. So Mantegna now, this is late 1440s. He is a highly original painter. He's a very young guy. He's 17 years old, okay, 17. He's still learning. He is intellectual. He has a good eye. He keeps very good company. He didn't copy from anybody. He continued to develop his own style, really consolidating everything that he has come into contact with. So here's 17-year-old Andrea Mantegna. He decides he's out of that. He's gone. He's done with Squarcione. He gets out of that situation with his apprentice situation. And he starts painting on his own. And I chose this painting. Is not the greatest painting on the face of the earth, but I mean, it's certainly not one of his masterworks, but I think it's really charming. This is St. Mark with his, the book of the Bible that he wrote. He's kind of peering out of a window. And I just love the details here, the elbow that sticks out over the windowsill, the little piece of paper with sort of the signature on it, the swag. How great is that? Like, he's improved on Squarcione's swag here. Is that not gorgeous? And then I'll just, crazy little detail. Notice how he's sitting like this. But look, his thumb is all up in his beard. I just think that's so cute. So you can see that Mantegna is really paying attention to natural details. So this is 17 years old, small painting. Then he manages to land this amazing commission, 17 years old. He lands a commission to paint the family chapel of the Ovetari family in the Church of the Eremiti in Padua. And it's actually the main apse. These are the big dudes in town. So he's painting the main apse, and he's tasked with painting a fresco cycle. And there are 12 enormous panels basically covering the walls of this chapel. And the reason we're not looking at that, and the reason I'm showing you a black and white photograph, is because unfortunately this was destroyed in 1944 in one of the 13 air raids that just pummeled Padua. So this was basically one of the major works of art. There were few major works of art that were totally obliterated in World War II, and unfortunately this is one of them. And this is probably the most important work of art that was lost in World War II in Italy. So think of this as just part of this great, enormous fresco cycle. Mantegna worked here from age 17 to age 25, and his style really developed. And even this black and white photograph, I mean, I just find it striking for the way he composed this scene. You're looking at St. James going to martyrdom. So St. James is being kind of condemned to martyrdom. And Mantegna has chosen to, he's showing us, we are, physically, when you were on site, you were looking up at this, but he's also created that perspective. It's called di sotto in su. We're down, we're di sotto, below, and we're looking up. And he just continues that, just like straight vertical of that architecture. And we're looking right up, and you notice you're seeing the underside of the chins of those figures, kind of like you did a little bit in Piero della Francesca. Really, theatrical and dramatic. And so he's also chosen to represent kind of fictive Roman architecture. So he's created a historical scene here. It's historically correct. St. James was in fact martyred in an ancient Roman town, so it's historically correct. But he's also, this is all made up stuff, by the way. So this is Mantegna just making up a building which basically finishes as a triumphal arch. But it's really super successful. So it doesn't have to be an exact representation of anything. He studied this stuff so well, he can just create it in his mind and paint it out here. And he's made this great scene of a Roman city. I mean, it's kind of cinematographic in a way, right? I mean, it's just like you're watching a film scene go by, a film set. It's crazy. So very dramatic. He's got the saint down here receiving judgment. We're looking up at the guy who's giving judgment just as he is. And you can see there, the figures are in fact quite like the Donatello sculptures. They're very sculptural. This is even a direct quote of a Donatello figure, who I think we've seen before in Florence on the exterior of San Michele. And then he's very interestingly used the single point perspective, and the vanishing point is not here. It's not even here. It's kind of over here. And he did that, to me, that kind of heightens the tension. And it also, by the way, linked to the panel next to it, which of course we don't have anymore, but he was able to create these single unit pictures, which really then also worked in the whole. So he has come a long way here. He's really managed to develop his own personal style by kind of taking in the bits and pieces of all these great artists that he's been in contact with. And this work, the work, not just this painting, but the whole cycle really made his reputation. So he's now really come into his own. He's 25 years old. He also, just following this, he got several more good commissions. One of the prestigious commissions was to paint the altarpiece for the Church of San Zeno in Verona. So this is a landmark painting in that Mantegna is mimicking those late Gothic partitioned altarpieces. I didn't point it out, but let's go back to that first slide where you see Squarcione's works of art. This is very common. Late Gothic partitioned altarpiece, gold ground, fancy gilt frame. So Mantegna gets this commission for the San Zeno altarpiece in Verona, and he designs the frame. And he's kind of made it look a little bit like it's going to be one of these partitioned late Gothic altarpieces. And he designed this fancy frame. He's got all this gilt gold, carved wood. He's got the architrave, though. He's really classicizing those. So take a look at this. It's no longer those spindly Gothic decorations, those little decorative spindly things. He's got this complete cornice, architrave, fluted columns, Corinthian capitals, entablature, and then below that is 3 pedella panels. So he's kind of following basically the idea of the main picture and the predella panels. But let's look at that main picture. So you can see now that his columns, which are in theory dividing this into 3 different works of art, are only the first set of columns for what is actually a Roman atrium, like the atrium of an ancient Roman house. So the first set of columns that we can see are the gilt ones that are actually carved in wood, and the rest of them are painted. And he's created this wonderful square space and placed all of his figures in there. So it's richly decorated. He's got the swags going through the middle. He's painted a very sort of successful ancient Roman relief frieze on the interior of this atrium. And then he's placed his figures, which are literally, again, these kind of sculptural forms, Donatello-like statues, basically receding into space. So you can see they're just receding back into the vanishing point, which is right here at the Madonna and Child. So the composition is kind of a breakthrough, but it's a little bit kind of academic in a certain sense. I think it's great. Some other scholars that I've read are not necessarily thrilled with this painting. I think it's amazing. I also think it's great that he's kind of pretending to do this late Gothic thing, but what he's really doing is introducing this absolute, complete Renaissance idea of all the figures in the same space, the vanishing point, all of that. And then below are these amazing predella panels, and they are completely different in that they're not at all kind of these staid sculptural academic forms. He's telling the story here of the Passion of Christ. There's the agony in the garden, the crucifixion, and then the resurrection. And these are scenes you don't even see. I mean, not everybody paints the agony in the garden. And he did it in such a way. Let's take a look at that one. Again, he's really kind of learned lessons from Netherlandish painting here. So here's this painting of Christ. He's asked his disciples to come with him. They've fallen asleep. He's been abandoned. Christ is praying to God to please change his fate. And I think, didn't he ask 3 times in Christ, and his answer was no. You know what's going to happen, and we're not changing. Your destiny is your destiny. So here's Christ. Where Christ is present, the trees are bursting out in fruit. And then in the background, reality is closing in, and separating the 2 kind of halves of the picture are this dead tree with a broken branch. And over here, down from Jerusalem comes Roman soldiers who are going to cross over this footbridge, and then they're going to come and arrest Christ. And we know what's going to happen next. Let's just take a look at some details here. The city of Jerusalem on the hill is basically a made-up ancient city. So Mantegna is using all of his creativity to put up kind of this round temple. There's a little pantheon right here. And then I love this is just the lower left of the painting, this bit right here. It's just a detail, the lower left of the painting, which basically doesn't have much going on. But look at the detail he's got here. He's got this little stream, the cat of 9 tails growing up. And look at the bunny hopping across the footbridge. Is that not great? And it's the footbridge itself. It's just this kind of, literally hacked out of a tree trunk with these interesting little branches that have been flattened out to be kind of nailed onto the bridge. I mean, obviously, this is just what footbridges looked like back in the 1400s. No, anyway, I think that's so lovely. So this really, again, served to cement Mantegna's career. And very shortly after that, he received a letter from Ludovico II Gonzaga, the Marchese of Mantua. You're looking at Mantua here, and Ludovico on the upper right. He sent a job offer to Mantegna, and this was one of those offers that you really could not refuse. So at age 29, 1460, Mantegna goes to Mantova in Italian, Mantua. He becomes the official court painter, art counselor, curator of all of their art collections, and director of this decorative arts workshop. So what you're looking at here is the Ducal Palace, and this is where the Marchesi lived and where Mantegna worked, and specifically the Castello di San Giorgio, and we'll take a closer look at that in a second. So you can see Mantua is on the water. It was originally surrounded almost on all four sides by water. There's a river that comes through here. We're in the Po River Valley, and this river Mincio floats by here, and they had actually kind of dammed it and created dikes so as to create this defensive structure of lakes. Some of it's silted in so that today you're really only have water on three sides. We're going to look at the historic center of Mantua here, and specifically this area where the Ducal Palace is located. So when you're in Mantua today, you get a lot of just kind of layers of architecture. This is Piazza delle Erbe with works of buildings that were built between the literally year 1000 and the 1400s. There are canals through town since we have all of this water present. It's an interesting visit, kind of romantic with the canals, and you have this great kind of medieval city. You get to the main piazza, Piazza Sordello, and this is the original bit of the Ducal Palace. And this was built in the 1200s by a family called Bonacolsi, who were the rulers of Mantua until the mighty Gonzaga decided, we're taking over. And the painting you see in the upper left corner, which I'm trying not to cut off, is the expulsion of the Bonacolsi from Mantua. 1328, the first Gonzaga, Ludovico Gonzaga, one of these condottieri, kind of mercenary soldiers, comes into Mantua and decides he's taken over, kills half the Bonacolsi and kicks the rest of them out and just takes over. So you can see Piazza Sordello, the Ducal Palace. So here's the Gonzaga dynasty. By the time Mantegna gets to Mantua, Ludovico II is in charge. He's followed by, during Mantegna's lifetime, Federico and Francesco II, who you see there on the bottom, and with his wife, the wonderful Isabella d'Este. So these are all basically the patrons of Mantegna, and their residence and royal palace has kind of expanded out from the Piazza Sordello. Here's Piazza Sordello. Here's that original, basically royal residence that we saw, Ducal Palace that we saw in the painting. And then each Gonzaga ruler adds on halls and courts and churches and castles and gardens, to the point that this is, in fact, these are the buildings that make up the Ducal Palace in Mantua. It's 380 square feet of palace, 7 gardens, 8 courtyards, it was full of art collections. They were called the Celeste Gallerie. They're unfortunately dispersed, but the Celestial Galleries is what they were called for their amazing art collection. So the Gonzaga were in power here for 400 years and really enriched the city with works of art. So when Mantegna gets to Mantua, his first task is moving the residence of the Marquis and his family from the Corte Vecchia, which you see on the upper left here, to the Castello San Giorgio. So Castello San Giorgio is a very old structure. It was built as a castle, it's a defensive structure, but it was turned into the Marchese's royal residence in 1460. The reason for this move is that Ludovico had secured Mantua as the venue for this papal congress, the Council of all European Christian princes. All of the European Christian princes came to Mantua for 8 months, and they participated in this congress. Pope Pius II called this congress. They were discussing a crusade against the Turks who had taken Constantinople. So that's kind of the point of this. So all these guys kind of descend on Mantua, and all of that takes place here in the Corte Vecchia. So Ludovico, A, needs to fix that up for them. B, needs to move his residence over to the Castello, and he really wants to make Mantua the new Rome. And he's been schooled as a humanist. He knows all about Mantegna. He really likes the fact that Mantegna is a classicizing painter, and that's why he invites him here to do this. So Mantegna accepts this job. He knows that this means he is in service to the Gonzaga until the day he dies in 1506. And in fact, he never left Mantua. He left Mantova twice. wants to go to Florence and wants to go to Rome with permission from the Gonzaga Marchese. He was, I mean, it was a great position, but he was also literally in service to the Gonzaga. So in the Castello di San Giorgio, his first job is to decorate the private chapel of Ludovico. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist. There are a couple panels dispersed, but he did a very important work that is still in situ, and that is in this square room in this northeast tower with these two windows right here. He was to decorate this sort of relatively casual reception room for Ludovico II. It's kind of a tight little square space. So Mantegna decides what he's going to do is employ all of this illusionistic architecture the way he knows how to paint it. So he decided to take advantage of the bit of natural light. We're inside of a fortified tower of a castle, so there's not a lot of light coming in here, and it's these thick walls. There is in fact light coming into these two windows, but what he's decided to do is make it as though the viewer is standing inside of this pavilion with marble arcades going all the way around you, and those arcades are actually covered with curtains. But when you pull the curtains aside, you get views of the countryside with the Mantegna family. You get a view of the Gonzaga family. You get a view of the Marchese and his family in their private garden. And then when you look up, you have this incredibly richly decorated ceiling. It's all painted. It does look as though it's stuccoed in gilt with these great, again, just sort of imaginary reproductions of classical sculpture. And you get to that oculus. Remember, the Pantheon actually has one of these round oculuses directly over your head. It's kind of similar to that. You look up and there's this fictive oculus looking straight out into the sky. So just that decoration was kind of remarkable, that he decided to very kind of lighten this room up by giving us a little peek into the life of the Gonzaga court. So here's the court scene of the Gonzaga. Notice the curtain has been pulled aside so that we get a little glimpse here of the family. There's Ludovico seated on his chair. He's just kind of casually dressed. His dog is hanging out. This is Rubino, the family dog, in his little dog bed underneath Ludovico's chair. Ludovico is talking to one of his secretaries dressed in Gonzaga livery, Notice the red and white tights. And then he's surrounded by his family. This is his wife, Barbara Brandenburg. Children, this is Paolo with the apple. Other children, members of court, nurses, this little kind of dwarf, sort of one of the ladies in waiting. And then all of these courtiers are coming up the steps to the right, kind of waiting for an audience. And that's one of his other sons, Rodolfo. Rodolfo Gonzaga is kind of being gatekeeper, and so sort of choosing when to let people in to speak to Ludovico. On the other wall, you can see scenes that are very important to the Gonzaga. They were horse breeders for generations. They were dog lovers, these huge kind of snarling mastiffs. They're kind of scary looking. And then on the right is this wonderful picture of basically all the males of the lines of Gonzaga. So we have we're assured of the Gonzaga dynasty for perpetuity here. So we've got Ludovico on the left, looking very grand and regal and dignified. His son, Francesco, who's the first Gonzaga to be elected cardinal. He'd been elected cardinal just a few years prior. They were very, very proud of that fact. Federico on the right. Federico's sons, repeating the names, Ludovico, Francesco, and then there's a Sigismondo. He becomes a cardinal as well. And they're shown here, they're in the foreground, but they're shown, we're not sure exactly who all those people are, but the Holy Roman Emperor is in the picture. The King of Denmark is in the picture. I mean, we have this idea that the Gonzaga dynasty, they are among the most important political families in Europe, and they're going to be around for a while. Notice all of, this guy is eventually going to be Marchese. So very much glorifying the Gonzaga dynasty. And then up in the oculus, which really is one of the works that Mantegna is most famous for. He's very famous for the entire decorative scheme there of what was known as the Camera Picta. It's now called the Camera dei Sposi because of the painting of the couple, the first painting that we saw, Ludovico with his wife. But really, he's really well known for this oculus, and it's really decorative and playful. So you got the swags all the way around, and these wonderful sort of cute little adorable chubby cherubs flitting about. They're getting their heads stuck in the balustrade. I think that happened to me when I was about 6. I remember going shopping with my mother and my head got stuck at a store called Sudi's in Jackson, Mississippi. My head got there's a stairwell in there. And then of course there's a peacock, you know, these exotic animals were present at court, ladies in waiting with their fancy hairdos, just kind of a fun picture. And then there's that, looks like a citrus tree that's planted in a cut off wine barrel that's really, if they're not careful, it's going to fall on our head. So Mantegna came up with this great kind of very decorative oculus. He then was given land by Ludovico to build his own house, and he built himself a house with a courtyard, which is pretty typical, but he built the round courtyard. You never see that. So he actually built the court he designed this round courtyard that kind of really repeated what he had designed in the Camera Picta. Mantegna did not have a ton of money. He wasn't, I mean, he lived very well, and he had a steady income, which is a good thing. But he wasn't made a wealthy man. But what he really wanted, he was aware of the fame of the Gonzaga family. He was aware of his fame as an artist and what he was doing for their art collections. And he petitioned for a title, and he was given the title of Conte Palatino and this nice coat of arms to go with it. Among his other duties, just as a curiosity, he wasn't just a painter. He was also in charge of this decorative arts workshop, and he designed architecture as well, but also sculpture, goblets, tableware, tapestry. He oversaw the production of all of that, pageants. They did scenery for plays that were put on at court. None of that exists. What we do have are a couple of cassone too. Cassone are kind of the predecessors of chests of drawers. So Paola Gonzaga, the little girl with the apple, when she got married, among the things in her dowry were these two great cassone that were designed and decorated by Mantegna. And while Mantegna could not work for anybody else, and he was literally in service of the Gonzaga, and that was that. He couldn't work for anybody else. He only did commissions that were given him by the Gonzaga. He did paintings for himself though, and this painting was found in his studio upon his death in 1506. And this is one of Mantegna's most famous works. It hangs in Milan at the Brera, and it's a very moving kind of panel about this big. It's not huge, and he's clearly showing. It's called the Lamentation of the Dead Christ. So there's Christ in that just raking perspective, foreshortened crazily, with his wounds very naturalistically depicted in full kind of full view for the viewer, us or Mantegna himself, to kind of contemplate on the sacrifice of Christ. And then we have some drawings that show you kind of how Mantegna was working through showing figures like that. It's the same guy on the same slab with the same sheet, right? So eventually he laid down, and Mantegna brought the viewpoint a little bit lower, so he got this this like straight shot of perspective from the feet on back. Technically, amazingly and accomplished. It's also a quite moving painting, and just again, kind of the way that Mantegna constructs these paintings is just amazingly emotional. Look at some of the details. The Fortuny pillow that Christ's head is laid on, the lovely curls of Christ, and then just the grief of the probably Mary and I guess St. John. And notice he has tears actually coming out of their eyes as they're grieving over the dead Christ. We're going to take a look at one more work that Mantegna did in Mantua. He worked a lot also for, we're now into the reign of Francesco II Gonzaga. He was a condottiere. He was off literally leading armies into battle, and left his wife Isabella d'Este as his regent when he was gone. The portrait you see there is Leonardo da Vinci's portrait of Isabella d'Este, done in 1500. So she married into the family in 1490, and she immediately started, I'll show you very quickly, we don't really have time for this, and so I'm just going to give you a hint of it. She was a great humanist scholar, really, and she maintained friendships with writers, philosophers, painters, and she had her own private study, the Studiolo of Isabella d'Este, there in the Castello di San Giorgio. And this will be the topic of an entire separate talk. We'll do that one day. We'll talk about some more Mantuan food. Today, we're going to finish with one of the last paintings that was commissioned by Mantegna by Francesco II, her husband. So here he is. He's just won a battle at Fornovo. He's chased off, for now anyway, the French troops. They eventually came in. In fact, this painting's in the Louvre because the Napoleonic forces took it and took it to Paris, and it's still there. But there's a brief moment in time where this painting was kind of processed into the Church of the Victory. This is the Madonna della Vittoria, the Madonna of the Victory. And you can see how Mantegna has used all of his great kind of classicizing elements and lovely, lovely decorative features. The niche where all of the figures are located is literally a jasmine topiary full of fruits and vegetables and birds. It's just crazy. And then the figures that, no, he also has these great reliefs down here with the original sin. And then the figures are Francesco II, who's, you know, very grateful for his victory. He's smiling up at Christ and the Virgin Mary. Isabella is interestingly not pictured. Isabella would normally be here. Instead of Isabella, we have her patron saint, who is the mother of Saint John the Baptist, Saint Elizabeth. So I kind of wonder if Isabella said, don't put me in that picture. I have this feeling Isabella didn't want to be in that picture, but we'll talk about that later. So instead of Isabella, you have Isabella's patron saint, who is Saint Elizabeth, with San Giovannino, as they call him in Italian, little baby Saint John the Baptist. And then you have the patron saint of Mantua, Andrea, and 3 military saints. So everybody's armed here. Francesco's wearing his armor, and you have Saint Michael Archangel with his sword. You have San Giorgio, who's got the broken spear. He killed the dragon. And then Saint Longinus in the back. He's the Roman soldier who was present at the crucifixion of Christ, actually caught the blood of Christ and personally brought it to Mantua, where they have a reliquary of the blood of Christ. That's in a different church. And then these great decorative elements, the coral hanging over the head of the Virgin, this great kind of sundial-y looking thing. And then even look at the birds here. There's a cockatoo. Nobody's quite sure how that cockatoo got in here because they're native to Australia. So they're interested, the scholars are interested to know what the trade routes were that a cockatoo made it so far that it could be depicted in the wonderful altarpiece of the Madonna of the Victory. So also in court here with the Gonzagas were, of course, chefs. So this is from a later period when the Gonzagas were actually dukes. 1662, their chef, Bartolomeo Stefani, published a cookbook, and he talks about how to prepare a banquet fit for a king, but he also talks about using local ingredients and just sort of what to do with them. And what they have in Mantua to cook with are lots of game. They had wild pigs back in that time, birds, freshwater fish, frogs, seasonal fruits and vegetables, lots of pork, rice. They're in the Po Valley, so there's lots of rice growing around there. When you're in Mantua today, one of the kind of special recipes is this riso alla pilota made with sausage, which we're not making today because I don't know how to make it. And it's rice with sausage, but there's a secret ingredient. And once I find out what it is, I'll teach you how to make it because I don't know what it is. But once I figure out how to do that, we'll come back to Mantua. We'll talk about Isabella d'Este Studiola. We'll make the dang rice with the sausage. So as soon as they let us out of lockdown, I'm going to go learn how to do that. Another food that is quite common in Mantua are the fried frog's legs, which totally makes me think about like a wedding buffet, you know, like a wedding party reception buffet in the 70s. They always had the frog legs on the table. That's the only time I ever ate a frog leg, when I was at like somebody's wedding buffet. And then mostarda, which is actually going to figure in what we're about to make. So mostarda is whole pieces of fruit or chopped up pieces of fruit that are candied in a very spicy sugar syrup. They make a sugar syrup with mustard seed and then candy the fruit, and they eat it with savory recipes. So you'll find this often served with Parmesan cheese or served with bollito, the boiled meats. And it's also used in the recipe that we're about to make, which is tortelli di zucca, also known as tortelli mantovani. And here are the ingredients we're going to use. The squash is this, we call it literally zucca mantovano, but you can find it in the United States as kabocha squash. And we're going to use mostarda. I'm going to tell you kind of how to substitute things. The only thing you can't really substitute here are the amaretti cookies, which is why I have the picture there of the Lazzaroni amaretti cookies. But y'all can order them online. So that's the only thing you can't skip on here. You can substitute most other stuff, like the mostarda, for example, but you need to find some amaretti cookies. So I'm going to stop sharing, and we're going to start to cook. So I'm going to show you how to make the tortelli mantovani, which start with baked squash. So I took that kabocha squash and I just cut it in half, baked it for about 30 to 40 minutes. I put some olive oil on the parchment paper, and then I placed a bay leaf in the cavity and then just baked the squash. And it's just, you can see how soft it is. So I'm going to just scoop the flesh of the squash out of here. So I'm going to show you how to make, that just fell out. Look at that. what's nice about this squash is it just literally turns into like this kind of puree all by itself. I mean, it literally is like, it is now squash puree. All I had to do was take it out of the oven. That's what the beauty of this particular squash. If you can't find this kind of squash, you can use butternut squash mixed with a little bit of sweet potato, which of course I can't find sweet potato. So I can find Mantovano squash, but I can't find sweet potato. But if y'all can't find Mantovano squash, I'm sure you can find sweet potato. So just scoop this out, kind of scrape away a little bit from the skin. The skin is actually edible, and so you can just serve it as a simple vegetable side dish if you want to, but we're gonna make yummy tortelli. So I'm gonna show you how to make the tortelli, and then I'm gonna show you the deconstructed version. So in case you don't feel like making pasta, handmade pasta dough, you can just make kind of a pasta sauce out of the squash puree and have the same flavors. Lorenzo, mi senti ancora?
Molto bene.
Ok, perché c'è un rumorino strano. All right, so I'm just going to kind of make a little paste here. Like I said, the beauty of this squash is that it comes out of the oven, it's already a puree. So I'm going to make just a small amount of filling for the tortelli. So I'm just to kind of show you how that's done. Use a little bit of squash. We'll save this for later. And then I'm going to use, let's see, first I'm going to put in some of the mostarda. I'm just going to show you how this comes. This is mostarda mantovana. So this is actually a pear one made in Mantua. And so pear slices are candied in the sugar syrup, and they're quite spicy and yummy. So we're going to use a bit of that just chopped up finely, which I've already done. And if you can't find mostarda, you can just use lemon zest, maybe a little bit of lemon juice, and some hot pepper. And it's really good just the same. I'm going to put in a little bit of the syrup just because I can. I put in a bunch of grated Parmesan cheese. So these flavors are just, it's really, I mean, it's complete sweet and savory together, and very much sort of makes you think sort of that royal court, because there's kind of interesting, kind of exotic flavors all put together. I'm also going to use a little bit of nutmeg. And then this is what kind of the last of the exotic flavors here are smashed up amaretti cookies. So when I get them, they're these little tiny things. The one, if you buy those Lazzaroni ones, they'll be kind of about this big. And you just smash them up into crumbs. So literally cookie crumbs. I know it sounds weird, it kind of is, but it's really good. So I'm just going to add some cookie crumbs here to my squash and cheese mixture. So if you think about the sweetness of the squash and then that kind of almondy sweetness of the cookies mixed with super spicy fruit, candied fruit, and then the salty Parmesan, and I'm going to add a little bit more salt, and I'm going to add a little bit more Parmesan too, because I can see that it's it can take it. If your mixture is wet at all, you can add some breadcrumbs. I'm just going to add enough cheese to kind of make it all stick together. And then you kind of need a lot of cheese just to kind of offset all that sweetness. Really interesting flavors though. And then the sauce here, you just run it through some butter or olive oil that's been warmed up with some bay or sage. I'm gonna get a sheet of pasta dough. So y'all have seen me make pasta a lot, and I went ahead and made it ahead of time just to save up some time here. And my dough, I tried to make my dough ahead of time, and it didn't really work out for me. So give me a second. I'm gonna go. Lorenzo, il telo bagnato non funziona.
Okay, it doesn't work.
That was Lorenzo's idea. It really was.
Yeah.
It was a good idea, but now I know it didn't work. So I'm gonna go roll out some pasta. Lorenzo, supposed to.
See, okay. If you want, I can show for everybody a thing that is on my mind when you show the Lamentation over the Dead Christ of
Uh-huh.
Mantegna, I remember that some years ago in Florence, I participated to make a show of pictures made with some children and people
Oh,
with disabilities.
uh-huh.
And we recreate the picture um, of some masterpiece of art.
Hmm.
I show you if you want.
Okay, good.
This is one of the this is one of the I show you. Okay. Oh, it's too big, but I try to show you. Okay.
Okay.
You see?
Oh, yeah. Hang
On,
on, I want to see.
okay,
Oh my
wait.
gosh, how did y'all do that?
This is on the left is the original pictures I show you,
Uh-huh.
and on the right there's a photo where we make the same picture. So there's
Amazing.
there's a lot of kind of these. If you show, this is the on the left Rosso Fiorentino, on the right the
Oh,
picture
cute.
that we
Right.
made with a little child with a trisomy, and
That's
this
a
is
real testament.
another picture, Ludovico Cardi, and this is the photo you see. And we have a lot of this kind of representation. On the left, you see the original picture. On the
Oh my
right,
gosh. Oh, look.
it's very
That's a real
interesting to
testament,
make.
though,
Yeah,
to the testament to the fame of that work of art by Mantegna.
yeah.
That
And the first, and we made a lot of. You see this only in this picture. The only fake is the child. Is not is the real
that's so,
child.
that's totally, yeah, interesting.
And you see the difference because between these and these.
Oh, cool, though. Very nice work.
And this show, this picture, we put in, we bring in the Museum of the Dome of Florence and in
Oh,
the
really?
Musei Vaticani.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's very
Cool.
interesting. So
Very interesting.
we come back to Elaine. Okay.
Okay, I've just rolled out some pasta dough, and I'm going to make just a couple of little tortelli. So these are basically kind of like ravioli, and I'm trying to figure out what shape I want to make them. I'm going to make them kind of rectangular. So I'm going to just, these don't need to be tiny like when we made the tortellini. These are tortelli. In fact, these are big tortellini are little ini, and these are tortelli, which are just normal size. So I'm going to make just sort of 3 or 4 of these, and I'm going to make them sort of big rectangles. See how I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this. Let's see. I have a utensil somewhere. Where did it go? Here it is. I have one of these. I like to buy these in antique, when the antique fairs, you often find this like a carved wood with a bone thing on it. So let's see. I haven't planned very well. I'm going to do these 3 like this. That's going to work, but I'm going to use a little bit of water just to seal the edges, just in case, because I don't want to risk it. I'm just going to fold it over so it'll be kind of sealed on 3 sides and a fold on 1 side. My dough is a little bit wet. It's been raining all day long. I'm kind of nervous about my wet dough. I don't like that. We'll see what happens to it. So fold these over. Try to avoid air bubbles. And then you can just cut them with your handy tool and kind of trim the edges a little bit. So these are kind of nice, I think, to make big. So they're just kind of like these big pockets. You'll see that. I'm gonna make a couple more. And then, so this actually is a little bit easier to make than the, this one I don't like the way it came out. It's not, I'm gonna not use this bit of pasta dough. You can just literally serve sort of as a first course, you can serve each person kind of 4 or 5. you don't have to make 100,000 of them like you do with tortellini, so it makes your life a little bit easier. Wet my dough again. So the deconstructed version, which I'm going to make in a second, you can actually kind of play with it. You don't even have to, you can just sort of throw all the ingredients in. These are not working out for me so good. Here we go. Maybe I should have just made the deconstructed version. I'm not very happy with my tortelli tonight. We'll see how they turn out. So I'm gonna let these rest for a second. So to make the deconstructed version, I actually add a little bit of bacon, and I've already cooked it, and I'm going to crumble it over the top. So the deconstructed version is all those flavors kind of just put together in the pan, very kind of informally and very quickly. So I've got some bacon. I'm calling it bacon because it kind of looks like bacon. It's not. I'm using pancetta. You can kind of see I started out with the rolled up pancetta, and I'm just going to, I've left the grease in the pan. This is what it looks like. Pancetta that my butcher makes. Whoa. So you can actually use bacon, but you can probably find pancetta if you look for it. And then, so I'm starting out with just some of the, I actually cooked it with olive oil. So there's a mixture of olive oil and the pan drippings from the pancetta or bacon. And I'm going to mix in the squash puree. This is just going to become the pasta sauce. I'm going to add a good bit of that mostarda with its liquid. I'm going to go ahead and add some salt, nutmeg. I'm actually going to add a clove of garlic in here also. So again, if you don't have mostarda, you can just use lemon zest and a little bit of hot pepper. I'm going to use a whole garlic clove, and I'm going to take it out before I serve. It's going to leave enough of its flavor, so we'll kind of do the trick. Just taking the nice purple peeling off. Okay. I think I'm going to stick a piece of, here we go, bay leaf in here too. So all these flavors are going to kind of come together. You can see how thick it is. So I'm going to go ahead and cook the pasta. I'm going to plop these in. Fingers crossed. My pasta is really wet. They should cook very quickly. In just a couple of minutes, they'll be done. And we'll run, just kind of gently run them through some olive oil cooked with a bay leaf. Warmed with a bay leaf, that is. They really need to boil just for a couple of minutes. I'm going to add some salt too. Everything's already cooked except the pasta, just that very thin pasta just needs to cook and kind of warm through the filling. It's really pretty because the pasta is so thin that you can see the nice orange filling right through it. I also want to use, in order to kind of loosen up the sauce a little bit, I'm going to add a little bit of the cooking water from the pasta. And I'm going to make tagliolini for the sauce. In the meantime here, since I believe we're probably running late. Are we running late, Lorenzo? Siamo indietro.
Sono le 7:30.
Oh, good. Okay. So we're just at 1 hour. I'm going to finish making the pasta. If y'all want to open up your microphones and comment or ask questions, or if there are any questions on the chat, Lorenzo can read them to me.
Yeah, I think
I'm going to show y'all. See.
I think the very important question is someone asked if it's a dessert or is a first course. It's normal to think that it's a dessert because it's very sweet, the squash and the amaretti and other things, but we serve like a first course, no?
This is a first course, and you can see I'm preparing these. I'm just going to kind of run them through the oil that's warmed with the bay, and then we're going to cover it with Parmesan cheese. So it is very sweet, but there's Parmesan cheese in the sauce, in the filling, and we're going to put a bunch of Parmesan cheese on top as well. And that's going to kind of cut the sweetness, although it is a sweet and savory dish. That's kind of the point.
You can use also chili, or is mostarda is already, it's almost the flavor of mostarda is too strong.
What do you mean?
I mean, if you put chili inside.
Oh, I am not putting any chili inside because this mostarda happens to be really spicy. Sometimes I get mostarda that's not very spicy. I go ahead and add some hot pepper, and if you don't have mostarda, then just use the hot pepper. So that's an easy thing to substitute for. A little bit of lemon zest and some hot pepper. In fact, I'm going to put some lemon juice in here because it goes really well. And this also helps to cut the sweetness of the squash. So these get served like this. You can see my green olive oil. And then just with tons and tons and tons of cheese on top. So these are the tortelli. You can kind of see a little bit of the orange coming through, super green olive oil. This is one of my favorite pastas. Although if you don't want to roll out pasta because it's kind of a chore, you can always do the deconstructed version, which is what we have going over in here. So again, these are just all the same flavors that were used in the filling. And I'm going to just turn it into pasta sauce. So I'm cooking some tagliolini.
Did you put the cookies in the sauce, the deconstructed, or no?
Not yet. I'm actually going to use them on top. So I've just put in the mostarda. I've used a little bit of garlic, the squash, some bay, and I'm going to toss the pasta in here, and then I'm going to top it with the cookie crumbs, Parmesan cheese, and some crumbled up pancetta, which is that kind of, you don't have to use the meat. It's perfectly good as a vegetarian dish, but it kind of, again, the pancetta kind of helps to cut some of the sweetness of the pasta. These will cook pretty quickly. But again, so the pasta cooking water now has starch in it that was released from the pasta. So I'm going to actually add that to kind of loosen this up a little bit.
Elaine, if you used butternut squash, it probably wouldn't be that sweet, right?
It would not be that sweet, but I generally would then add a chunk of sweet potato. And so you can kind of approximate the same flavor by adding some sweet potato to the butternut squash. And the butternut squash also doesn't turn into puree, so you want to bake it for kind of a long time, and then you may end up putting it in a food processor or just maybe using a ricer, that kind of thing, because you really want it to kind of be more of a puree type consistency. But you can just mash it up with sweet potato and you get it's a very similar flavor, very similar. Just a few more minutes, these will be done. So I hope all y'all got our Christmas recipes. I don't know if any of y'all made any of our Christmas recipes. I actually made those little Calabrian sweets. I don't know if y'all noticed. Somebody pointed out to me that the recipe didn't call for an egg, and then it said to add an egg. And actually there was sort of a debate going on about whether or not we wanted to add an egg, because the recipe comes from somebody who's no longer with us, and the person who wrote it down didn't make very good notes. So we were kind of having to guess. We made a bunch of phone calls. I even called Agatha. Remember Agatha, who helped me make the Parmigiana over the summer? Agatha said, if you want desserts, don't come to me. So I didn't get much help from Agatha, but we made the recipe using an egg because most of the Calabrese who we talked to said to do it. And the answer was no, don't use the egg. So I wish we have to try it again. The egg was not the answer. But it was fun trying them out. Those traditional recipes, every family has their own version basically, and literally every woman in town makes their own version of it. So we were trying to reproduce my friend's mother's version. We got kind of close, and it was fun. So it was good for Christmas. All right, I'm going to go ahead and toss this in here. It's a little bit on the al dente side, but that's okay.
Elaine,
So I'm going to just take.
We have a question. What was
Please.
the number of the pasta machine that was the final thickness?
Oh, I made it as thin as possible. I want this to be thin because basically you're doubling over the pasta and there's kind of a lot of pasta in there. I don't want it to be too thick. So I wanted the pasta to remain nice and thin. And if you can get a view of this, I mean, you can kind of see the filling showing through. That's kind of how you want it to look. So you're not just eating all carbs. And I'm going to go ahead and take this out of here. And when you want, a lot of times you want some pasta cooking water. And so instead of draining the pasta in a colander, just use tongs. Giusto, Lorenzo?
Yeah.
Like when you make aglio olio peperoncino, giusto?
Yeah, giusto.
Elaine, if this is a first course, what would you recommend for the second?
I would recommend something, this is so flavorful. You might want to just have, I don't know, like a piece of meat on the grill,
Yeah.
small, and a salad. You know,
Or
nothing
a pork
elaborate.
fillet.
Or a pork fillet, true.
Yeah.
No tongue, Lorenzo? No tongue?
I think that'd be tongue would be a little heavy after this. Also, by the way, you can also just stir this into rice if you don't want to eat the pasta. You can just stir it into rice. Actually, I do that pretty often. So this pasta is made with our ancient grains, and it's just soaking up the. I need a ladle. It's soaking up the liquid. I need to add some more water, cooking water, pasta cooking water. So I'm going to serve this. I should have made, this is enough sauce for sort of 3 servings of pasta and enough pasta for 1 serving. So I'm just going to leave some of the sauce here in the pan. And when I serve it, I'm going to take out the garlic clove and the bay leaf. So the pasta, oh my gosh, it's just literally soaking up the liquid here. So this is the pasta. It's liberally dressed. I would normally, if I had my druthers, I would have used less sauce on here, but I've been playing very well. So there's the pasta. And then I'm going to top this with a little swirl of olive oil. It's got the lemon juice in there. It's got the mostarda. I'm going to top it with some cookie crumbs to get the cookie flavor. And I'm going to crumble up some of the pancetta on top just because it's so yummy and kind of, again, cuts the sweetness. And then Parmesan cheese. And there you go. So 2 ways to make tortelli di zucca and deconstructed tortelli di zucca. Recipes on the way tomorrow. Any more questions?
Can we come over to eat?
I wish y'all could come over to eat. Nobody can come over to eat. We're in red zone still. So not even Lorenzo can come over to eat.
Thanks so much, Elaine. Happy New Year, Doug.
You're welcome, y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Thank
Hope I'll
you.
see y'all next
Thanks.
time.
I did.
Bye, y'all. Happy New Year to everybody.
Elaine,
Yay.
hi, Elaine. I have a question.
Yay.
When you add the deconstructed, you're adding the cookie crumbs on the versus the other one. You add a cookie crumbs inside. Wouldn't it have a completely flavor? The cookie crumbs mixed inside versus on top?
No, it's the same flavor. It's basically the exact same flavor. It's just,
Okay.
and when they're inside, they tend to lose their crunch. But it's nice to
Okay.
have them crunchy. So
Okay,
that's
so the
only difference.
purpose, the reason you do it on top at the end is to keep it crunchy.
Well, it's just the idea is making it as simple as possible. And so if you're going to do the deconstructed version, I think the idea is you don't want to work very hard. I don't know. I just sort of, I don't know, just throw them on the top instead of mixing. I don't know. We just came. You can do it either way you like.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Brava. Grazie.
Prego. Grazie to everybody. Good to see you all. Happy New Year.
Elena, I
Happy
tuned
New Year.
in late just to say goodbye to you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. That's my dad. Happy New Year, Dad.
Buon
Happy
anno.
birthday. He had a birthday.
Ciao, Lorenzo.
Ciao, Dave.
Also, yeah, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Ah,
Hi, David.
Joe says happy birthday, Dad.
okay.
Oh, yeah. Happy birthday, David.
Thank you. Grazie. Grazie
Buon
tanto.
compleanno. Ciao Elena, buon anno.
Ciao. Buon anno anche a te, Maria Luisa. Ciao.
Ciao.
Y'all, thanks so much for tuning in. It's great to see everybody. I'll see
Good
y'all
job on
next
the
time. We'll be in
Gonzaghi,
touch.
Elaine. Brava, brava.
Oh, grazie.
Bravissima.
It was wonderful. Thank you.
Sì.
Bye, y'all. Hey, Paul and Mary. Hey,
Ciao.
Mary, you're going to ask me what wine to drink with this.
Yeah.
I would say, again, we want to cut the sweetness, and I would cut the sweetness with a really heavy-bodied Lambrusco. Very dry Lambrusco.
Brava.
But
Fizzy
dry.
red,
Dry.
dark red, dry.
Dry. Not
Which
sweet.
they have not cheap. Dry being a synonym for cost some money, but it kind of does. You can actually find it. But most Lambruscos are made in Emilia Romagna in the area more of Modena and Parma. But there actually is a Lambrusco that's made in Mantua, the only Lambrusco made in Lombardy, and it would go perfectly with this.
Thank you.
Wine
Più
tip.
secco. Sì. Beh, brava. Ciao Bella. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao. Ciao. Bye, y'all. So good to see everybody. I'm gonna see y'all next time. Signing off.
Good to see you.
Bye.